And we're live.
Tim, I was watching your newest thing and focusing really hard. So Eric, Tim's been changing our intro quite a bit, and
I've got really into like graphic effects and things, and I had a really impressive one, which wasn't that one, but it doesn't seem to work very well on StreamYard. So anyway, before I get off on a tangent,
let's plug you really fast. I'm going to plug Tim really fast because he doesn't like to plug himself. He's really good at this graphic stuff and all this video stuff he does, and he's designed something for May King. May King show, if you guys know May King. So go check out May King on Facebook and wherever she is. But there's your plug, Tim.
Yes. Anyway, let's give this wonderful Erik guy the chance to plug himself. We've discovered that he's going to have a barbecue in Denver for Podcast Movement. But for anybody who doesn't know who you are you and what do you do? Let's ask that broad question. Oh, did we mute him? Did we mute him?
Yeah. All right. Well, so I am, my name's Erik Nevins. I live in Denver, and I lead a group called Christian Podcasters Association, which started as a Facebook group just in 2017. To be honest, I was just lonely as a Christian podcaster. And so I was like, hey, maybe there needs to be a group for us. That was actually in the podcast movement group. Somebody was looking for a specific group or something. And I asked, hey, is there one for Christian podcasters? Nobody had anything. So I was like, hey, let's start one. Let's go do it. And it just turned into this thing that I do.
Tell us about your podcast, your own podcast. What got you interested in podcasting and what you like to talk about?
Yeah. So the short version of that story is I was working at a bank. I sometimes affectionately refer to it as bank jail because I would go to work and sit in a 6x6 cell until somebody told me it was time for lunch. So I didn't really particularly enjoy that, but my job was to bounce people's checks or block their debit cards. So it was really to ruin people's day. And it wasn't great. I did not enjoy that very much, but I was bored, right? Because there's just not a lot. You're just clicking buttons. And so I discovered podcasting and audio as a way to sort of entertain myself. And I listened to just some of the people who were doing it like really early on, right? So John Lee Dumas and Amy Porterfield and Michael Hyatt and Cliff Ravenscraft and some of these people who are just like luminaries in the space as far as I'm concerned. And I realized maybe I could do this, right? Maybe I could do this. My background is in biblical studies, and I studied to have a Master of Divinity from Denver Seminary, which is how I ended up out here. And I wanted to be a pastor, but I graduated during the downturn, and there's a whole story to why that didn't ever seem to work out, which I'm grateful for now. But I ended up going, hey, I still want to contribute to this spiritual formation conversation, which is what I studied, and podcasting seemed like a good way to do it. One night I was working overtime, and this guy on the phone said, hey, you've got a great voice. You should be on the radio. And I was like, fat chance of that happening, right? And then and I was like, okay, let's see what it might look like if I started a podcast. And that's how I got into it. You asked about what my show is. Let me tell you what I did. So my show is called Halfway There, and I like to say it's one part statement about the spiritual journey, one part hat tip to Bon Jovi, because everybody knows Living on a Prayer, right? But the whole idea is that the spiritual journey is longer, deeper, and wider than you've been told. So it's the Christian journey, right? Life with God takes more forms than at least what I was told when I was a kid. So in my circles, it was, my life was terrible. Now I met Jesus, and now my life is great, which is awesome, except for all the other things that happen in life. So we try to tell the whole story of what that's like.
So I'm always very into podcasters. I used to be a podcaster, and you can argue whether a live show's a podcast or not, but that's a whole other argument.
Seems like you're doing all right. It's in the same vein, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is the same vein, really. But why did you feel the need that there was a need for a Christian podcasting group? What are the specific things that you felt like you needed to talk to other Christian podcasters about? I'm not saying like whether it's good or bad, but it's like, what particularly was it that you thought, we really need a Christian podcasters group?
That is a great question. So I think there's a couple things. Because you're right, a lot of the mechanics of it, right, are very similar, but it's going to be all the same stuff, right? We're all dealing with microphones, we're all dealing with hosting and websites, and the principles are all the same. In fact, most of that stuff I learned from people who either aren't Christians or aren't explicitly Christians, right? But I think there is something that Christians value in their message, which comes before the mechanics. I think I have a 5-part kind of journey that I could tell you about if you want, but that goes into how you create your podcasting house, as it were. And message is one of those things. And so I think Christians wanted somebody who understands the message that they're trying to share, which should be good news for people. And so that just doesn't always resonate, and it doesn't always, some of the motivation sometimes isn't always the same, right? So a lot of my podcasters, for instance, think of their podcast as a ministry, as something they do for good, not really for money. Now, I don't think those two have to be in conflict. That's not exactly it, but I think a lot of people are still on that journey. And so that's, they want somebody that they think gets it, and I get to be that person.
Do you have special guests that come on, Erik? And if you do, who are some of your favorites?
Oh man, I do, absolutely. So on my show, one of the interesting things about podcasting is that you can meet a wide variety of people, right? And you can meet your heroes. So I'll tell you about a couple, and then maybe who I'm looking for. So the like, for instance, one of the reasons I decided to do my show the way I did is because I read this book by a guy named Os Guinness. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He's Irish. He's from the Guinness family, of beer.
Yeah.
So I read a book by him, and it was really about character, or it was part of it. It was really about politics, but he's kind of a philosopher, so it was really heady. But the thing I took from it was that how you change character is by telling stories, right? So honestly, I wasn't a very good preacher when I was in school, right? Like, that's not my thing. Telling people what to think, what to do. I don't really like to do that, but getting people to tell me their story and what they did and why, that is a sweet spot. I really enjoy that. So I was gonna had this profound influence on me. I got to interview him, and I've had him on twice now, and both times it just was like really amazing for me. Some of the people I used to love, like I've had rock stars on and things like that. And, one guy, you guys know the band Petra? Did you guys ever hear of them? Right? Okay, so we're talking. Yeah. So I had their lead singer on. He was in a secular rock band. He got thrown out of his secular rock band for doing too much cocaine, which that's a lot of cocaine, right? That's a lot of cocaine. He had a real problem. Anyway, he ended up told me a story. His wife made him go to see their pastor, and he was like, "I didn't know I agreed to this." She goes, "Oh, you were drunk last night," because he didn't remember it. And so then he goes, "I walked in with an attitude. I walked out with the Holy Spirit." Like, that was, I thought that was amazing. So I get to hear stories like that. But then the coolest thing is just ordinary people. So my tagline is honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. I love to talk to, so I love the famous people, and I get to talk to a lot of those folks if I want to. But I also love to talk to just ordinary people who are creating stuff that they want to share, and that they've been on a journey. Because I kind of have the secret goal. Don't tell anybody, but I want to. I hope that my show stands the test of time, so that, sure, people are listening to it now, but I'm always thinking 100 or 200 years from now, I would like somebody to look back at my show and they go, "What was it like to be an American Christian in the 21st century?" I've documented that, right? That's what I've done. So I would love to have it stand as this kind of much bigger picture. So when I interview people, I'm always mindful of that, both in the famous and the not famous side.
Do you feel that there's, like, from a Christian viewpoint in podcasting, do you think there are ethics to podcasting that, well, I mean, they apply to anybody, but they're more likely to apply to Christian podcasters? So, for example, I've heard rumors in the podcasting community of people taking guests where they've been paid to take that guest, but indirectly, let's say, by buying books or the rest of it, and they've not made that clear to their audience. So do you feel that there are an extra set of requirements for any kind of religious-based person who's podcasting? What are your views on the ethics of podcasting, so to speak?
Yeah, that's really a good question. I think you're right when you say that the ethics apply to everybody, really. And so what I would encourage, particularly Christian podcasters, to do is to be really careful about their ethics. So you can't steal music, right? Like it just telling people you can't use music that is not licensed or that you haven't paid for the right to use. You just can't do that. And doing it really damages the credibility of your message, right? I think, I don't know about, I've never paid anybody or had anybody offer to pay me. Like that makes me wonder what my number is. What would I take? But but I think, yeah, if you do that, it should be disclosed, right? So I have had a few people do ads. So an ad is a different thing, right? Because people know that this is an ad and this is something that's paid for. I'm trying to think of other ethical kinds of issues. I don't think they vary differently. I think what you have to do is be honest with your audience, right? Because one of the key things about podcasting is it is a trust medium, right? So you want people to know, like, and trust you. If you're doing things that make it that damage that credibility and that trust, that's a problem. And so why are you even doing it in the first place? Because if you're not going to honor that.
Yeah. So I don't think I understand this, Tim and Erik. You said something about money and taking advantage of people. What do you mean by this? How does this happen? What are you talking about?
I think we need to have a very basic conversation here.
What are you talking about?
Look, Christians would never do that. Would never do that.
I don't think I understand this part, but Erik, it sounds like you want to leave a legacy, is what you're really saying. You want to leave a legacy with your podcast, and 200 years from now, you hope people look back and see or say, this is what it was all about. What is that? What is your message? What is your primary message or story?
Yeah. Well, so I think there's two, and it's between my podcast and what I do with Christian Podcasters Association. So with my show, which really does lead into the other, I absolutely, when I was starting it in 2016, one of the major things on my mind was I haven't done anything, right, that matters to anybody else, right? I've done absolutely nothing. Now, obviously, I have my family and there's those relationships, but I wanted to impact the world. And so when I talk about that with Halfway There, that absolutely is a piece of what I want. And so I think, like I said, when I think long term, it's just so encouraging. It's very valuable to know what other people were thinking. So even this week, I'll give you an example of a way that history can help, right? So like have you guys heard about this revival going on at Asbury? So regardless of what you think of it, people are on both sides and they're on there's lots of opinions. I spend too much time on TikTok. That's just the way it is, but I see a lot of those. But I go back to something that I studied when I was in school and we did church history. Jonathan Edwards, who we think of as a very like staid and stoic kind of guy, had weird stuff happening during his preaching, right? And there was a whole revival, and he wrote a book about this called On Revival, and he basically says, look, who am I to stop like what could be a move of the Holy Spirit? I don't want to stop it. So I'm hoping that someday somebody looks at my show and goes, let's see what this was like for other people, right? And then it has that same kind of helpful wisdom bringing. Okay, the other legacy that I want to do, because I think the American church, I'd be curious about your context as well, but from my observation, the American evangelical church, there's some nuance to that we don't have time to get into, but is at a crossroads, and there's a lot happening where traditional clergy, like their job as information dispensers is gone, right? Because information is freely available. That's no longer their job. But they're having a hard time adapting. And so they need to start helping people adapt and create in order to learn, because this is how people learn. I get to do that. So I get to help Christian podcasters do that. I also think I talk about all the time about the spiritual journey. And one of the pieces of that is discovering who you are, who God has made you to be. God will often take identities away from us in what can be very dark times and give us other identities. And you see this in people's stories all the time. And that, which is what I talk about on my show, but that moment when you come out of it and you start to go into a place of serving from who you really are instead of who you're supposed to be, that's power. There's a lot of power there. That is when people can really not only take off, but serve other people just with fire. So when we talk about legacy, I would love for Christian Podcasters Association to be a place, whether it's ever written about in history books, I don't care, but I'd love for it to be a place where Christians develop they develop their voice, and it makes this huge impact around the world for good. If that can happen, it's just a small ask. I don't know, but I'd be pretty happy.
Tim, I have a follow-up question if you're okay with that. Yeah. Something that I love is you honed in on who are you? And I love that. I love when people actually discover who they are, or when they're discovering it. I think it's a lifelong journey. But Erik, I want to ask you, what have you discovered? Who are you?
Yeah. A lot of things. I think since I started podcasting, I am a conversationalist. I love asking questions. I love hearing what people say. I love promoting other people's work. I've learned that something that's kind of inherent in that, but I've done it a little bit professionally, but not a lot, is spiritual direction, and which is a process of listening to not only the person in front of you, but also to God at the same time, and having this sort of spiritual connection. And so I do that. But I'm also an enabler. And I think one of the things that I've always wanted to do was to help other people discover who they are as well, and use their gifts and empower them to make a difference in the world. That absolutely has been the greatest joy that I have, whether that's people that I just know on the internet or my kids, right? Those are the things that I really love to do.
I love that. I love when people discover, and I love that question because it's different than what do you do? It's who are you? It gets to the core of who the person is. So as soon as you tapped in on that, I was like, oh, we're going to, let's go there.
I love it.
Yeah, it's funny. We've had a lot of religious guests on this show, even though I'm not especially religious. Christelle is Christian. I have no idea what particular brand of Christian all your American Christian stuff is.
It's very complicated. It's a mess over here. Like, I don't know. You guys never should let us do that.
But I was going to ask, actually, more generally, with your Christian Podcast Association, is that intended to be US only, or is it a global? Like, could any Christian, like, say somebody from Africa was listening and they were like, "Oh, can I join?"
Oh yeah, absolutely. We do have people from all over the world. Generally, I think the majority of podcasters are in the United States, but absolutely, we do have people from all over. In fact, if you're a Christian podcaster and you want to be on my show and you're out in another country, I'd love to hear, reach out to me, because I would love to do that. Because I also would love reaching out around the globe. I've interviewed people from Asia and from the UK, and I'm trying to remember who else. It's been a while, but from a few other places, which I thought were really cool, because you get different stories, right? You get different kinds of things. Like, I'll tell you what, everybody from Indiana has a very similar story about how they found faith. They grew up in it, right? That's just the way it is. But people who I interview from the Northwest, different story, or the like New England, whole different story, the way they came to faith, right? Because it's a different environment. So I'm sure, and I know it's different in other parts of the world. So I'd love to hear that.
Awesome. So I can't get the color song out of my head now that you mentioned Petra. It's spinning in my head.
That's an old school. Like, that's really cool. I just love them. Like, they were one of my favorites. But then to be able to go and reach out to John Schlitt and say, "Hey, can you come on my show?" He's told his whole story. It just is one that stands out to me as like, that is unbelievable. I had also had Jamie Rowe. I don't know if you remember Guardian, but he was on. I had Jamie Rowe from Guardian, and he's got a new album coming out that he's putting out, and I'm hoping to get him back, because I think it'll be.
Okay, so did you see the Mercy Me movie?
I did not.
Oh, you have to watch it. It's really good. And I was going to ask you if you've had anyone from Mercy Me, or the main guy, I guess the guy who wrote the song that went.
Yeah, Bart. I haven't. So I'm really a hair guy, so I'm a hairband guy. So that's, as you can't tell from the Bon Jovi references, that's kind of my jam. So it's all right. But that's, it feels like I can't decide if it was because music moved on or because that's just the kind of music that I like, or I just got busy, and I didn't listen to as much music as I used to. But I'll give me late 80s, early 90s, hair bands any day of the week. That's what I'll listen to.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So let's say there's there's an African Christian podcaster who watches this show and he thinks, somebody who wants to be a podcaster, what would be your advice to a new podcaster in terms of, because they might, I've seen it put about that some people do have this, like, you should start a podcast because you're going to have wealth and success and all the rest of it. That's one potential downfall. But what would be your advice to, let's say, somebody, Africa or United States even, who's thinking of starting a podcast with a kind of, probably not necessarily even a commercial incentive, if they want to do it for some religious reason. So what would be your advice to them?
Yeah.
We get to the question. Yes.
So I'm gonna address that, what you said about, like, podcasting is not gonna make you immediately wealthy and famous, right? It only does that for people who already have an audience. Right? If you've already got an audience, they'll listen to your podcast because they like you. But if you haven't built an audience, a podcast is a great way to do that. So you just got to temper your expectations so that you realize your first episodes, your first 50 episodes might only get tens of downloads instead of hundreds of downloads and thousands of downloads, right? That's okay. That's how it goes. What can you do to get your message in front of those people? So this is how I talk about it. Like I said, I went to seminary, so I'm contractually obligated to alliterate in every presentation that I give. So I have 5 M's that I talk about, but I think about it like a house. And so it goes like this: mindset, which is your foundation. I think believing that you have a message to share, believing that you can do the work, and committing to showing up to do that, regardless of how long it takes and what you need to do, is the kind of the first foundation. So I would say, work on that, make sure that you believe those things. And then I think message is like the framing of the house. So it's the 2x4s and all the stuff that kind of holds it up. So whether you have, 2 pillars of that and a roof, or however that works, you should have some key ideas that hold up your message that you're going to build things around. And so, like, for me, that was the spiritual journey is longer, deeper, and wider than you've been told. That's what I do on my show. So we try to tell the whole story. These 5 M's are what I do for Christian Podcasters Association. That's my message. Then there's the mechanics. So this is the place where everybody always starts, is they want to figure out, like, let me get a microphone, let me get a, right, which makes sense. I get why you want that stuff, but I know that it can be a little scary, but that is not the key issue, right? The key issue is, are you going to stick with it? Like, why are you starting it? So that's mindset. And then what are you going to say? Who are you going to serve? So I forgot to say about message, it's about a core transformation, right? So you have to have a transformation that you're going to offer to your audience in some way. Then that makes going through all the junk that you got to go through with the mechanics worth it, right? And the mechanics is your plumbing, your heating, your HVAC, all the stuff that in your house, you do it once and you hope you never have to see it again, right? You hope you never, because if you do, something's gone wrong. So hopefully everything is good and you kind of set up your systems. Then there's marketing, which I think of as curb appeal for your house, right? So it's like planting some flowers, making it look good, making it attractive, so that people will come and hang out with you, live in your living room and in your spaces that you're creating for your community. And then finally, monetization is just making your land productive, right? So turning it into, whether you're planting a garden or putting in a water spout, what do we call those things? A water collection, you know what I'm talking about? I forget the name, but something like that, where you can make your space productive, and that way you can put more into it in order for it to produce. So that's kind of the message that I think is true. It's really true for all podcasters, but particularly for Christian podcasters. We'll spend a little more time in that message piece, relating a Christian message to whatever their niche is.
Let's ask this. Someone wants to get into podcasting for the very first time. They're a little bit scared. What is your number one piece of advice for that newbie, fresh on the scene?
I would say get started. Just go ahead and get started. It took me 2 years to start my podcast, and it doesn't have to take that long. It doesn't. You just need to take one step at a time. I offer coaching and things where I take people through that in 12 weeks, and we can get you launched. But you need to do some of this other work. Like, it does take some time, but you can also iterate, right? So one of the greatest lessons I learned from my coach, Tim Morris, was it doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to sound great. If your message is good and your message will resonate with your audience, your audio doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't. Nobody cares about that, as long as it's not distracting. If it's full of echo or something, like, nobody's going to want to listen to that. But you can get a basic microphone that will do just fine. We were talking about this earlier, right? For $100, not that much. And that's really all you need to get started.
Okay, so this is where normally Christian asks the question, and I'm thinking of the next question, which for some reason I got distracted there.
What were you looking at?
Who would be your ideal, like, if you could have anybody on the planet to interview next week on your show, who would you pick?
Wow. So I like to say, I think I can reach almost anyone, at this point. So there's a couple people on my list, but there are certain levels that I can't. So usually those are governmental levels, right? Where I don't think I can reach people, although I haven't really tried that hard. I would love to interview George W. Bush. I know he can be controversial, but he has a faith story. He was led to Christ by Billy Graham, which I think would be really interesting to hear. I've always had more affection for him than probably I should. And then the other person, I want to really get Adam Wainwright, who is a pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals, which I'm a Cardinals fan. So I would love to interview him. This is his last season. I've tried multiple off seasons to get him to, like, hey, you're not busy now? What do you think? But I'm sure during the year he's not going to want to do it. And maybe in the next, say next November, December, January, maybe I can get him.
Yeah.
I have a really odd question. This is it's personal because I've had experience. I have my own show as well. When you get someone who's at a certain level, do you have to work around their schedule? Or are you able to ink them in?
I will. So I do interviews on Wednesdays. So this is my day. So today I'll do 2 interviews, and I'll try to edit 2 interviews to schedule so that every week I get just a little bit more ahead. It doesn't always work out because I take trips or something and then I get messed up. But today I will do that. So if people can't do it, then I will work around. Like, I will offer. And so it depends on who I'm working with. If I'm working with a publicist, I'll let them figure that out, like at a publishing or company or something, which I love, by the way. Nobody told me that when I started I could get free books. Do you know how many books? Like, this whole shelf back here is just full of free books that publishers have sent me. But I will work around it if I can. I usually let them know, hey, here's my link, but if you can't find anything, let me know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah. Well, that's one advantage of podcast over a live show. You're a lot more flexible with the timings of when you do it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can have a live show at any time, but if you keep moving it around, as I do with my book chat live show, people get confused as to, like, when's it actually going out? And it's like, well, it's different this week because the guests can't make it.
Right. Well, that's right. So you need. I did this even in my membership. I did this recently where we meet every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, right? But my guest, he had a small group at that night. I said, all right, this one time I'm going to move it. We moved it to Thursday. People showed up because they liked the guest. They knew who he was. And so they were like, we want to do it. But I wouldn't do that regularly. You want to be part of your people's lives, right? That's one of the key things. You want to become part of their routine. So I loved when it was Tuesday and a new episode of whatever show, was out. And I was like, oh, that's great. Cause now I don't have to wonder what I'm going to listen to sitting in my little cubicle, bouncing somebody's check, today. So.
Yeah.
Okay, Erik, when people reach out and find you offer coaching, you offer the Christian Podcasters Association. How can people find you and be part of all of these things that you do?
Yeah. The best website is ChristianPodcastersAssociation.com. You can go there. You can pick up, I've got like a whole planning sheet for like figuring out your message and the kinds of things that you want to talk about. So you can get that. That's free. Get on the mailing list. Facebook, you can go to Christian Podcasters Association or Christian Podcasters Association. Just search for that on Facebook. You'll find the group. You can join that and then see all the things that we do there as well.
Okay, well, thanks so much for being the guest today. And you'll be able to see my amazing outro titles, which are exactly the same as I've been for a while.
Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
This is always exciting. Thank you, Erik. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye.
This is what God requires.